Player choice. It's one of the most important aspects of a game. It's what makes a game different than a movie. With a movie, the first time you watch it, the second time you watch it, whether you're watching it alone or with friends, every experience is going to be exactly the same. In a game, player choice allows each player to have a different experience playing the game, and more often than not, have a different experience on multiple playthroughs. In Super Mario Bros., on your first playthrough, you might make it a couple levels and eventually run out of lives. On your second playthrough, you might find a couple of power-ups, or even find a couple skips to later in the game and get even farther. By your fifth or sixth playthrough, you might even potentially complete the whole game. Now, if you give your game to your friend, maybe they find different power-ups than you did, maybe they found different skips than you did, maybe it took a different amount of attempts to complete the game than it did for you. All of this is because player choice allows us to create unique experiences. The true epitome of this experience is in Sandbox games. The games allow you to explore on your own and find things how you want. They allow you to take on challenges as you see fit, and they allow you to create your totally own unique experience of playing the game. In Breath of the Wild, many players can tell you what it was like seeing a dragon for the first time. Initially, there's a fear thinking they're going to have to fight this thing, and then a realization that it's not hostile, and then a curiosity when you realize it's totally docile and you try to get closer and explore it. Or maybe that wasn't your experience. Maybe you saw it but immediately ran away. Maybe you saw it and explored it and actually found something from it. Or maybe you never saw it at all just because you didn't happen to come across it while you were traveling through those areas. Or maybe in fact you never even had a chance of seeing it because the way you explored Hyrule, you never went to any of the locations those could be found. These are not the experiences of your player character. Link is not experiencing these things. You are experiencing this because the game allows you to have full control to interact with the world as you see fit. Sandbox tabletop games, and more particularly Sandbox D&D, has always been a thing. However, there's a different way of running a sandbox game than there is of a linear game. Many DMs who are more comfortable running linear games, in fact, get caught up with that sort of playstyle when they try to do a sandbox and either fail to do a sandbox entirely or run a really bad sandbox. So today, I'm not just going to talk about how to run a sandbox, but how to do it well, and most importantly, how to prepare for it in a reasonable manner. And just a reminder, if you want to support this channel, the best thing you can do is clicking that subscribe button. Now, onto the video. Sandbox games in TTRPGs have to be done differently than you would see them in video games. In a video game, whether or not the game is linear, sandbox, or anything in between, the game still has to be made totally in completion before being given to the player. Whereas in D&D, you can't really be expected as a DM to have your entire world fleshed out and ready to explore. However, you still need to give your players that feeling and the ability to explore how they please. Now, we're in luck, because TTRPGs actually have a huge advantage over video games, which as in a video game, you're always experiencing it as the player. You have a player character, however, those characters' intentions and wants aren't really as big in the forefront as what your interests are. Whereas in a TTRPG, more players are a lot more thoughtful of what their player character would actually want to do. As Breath of the Wild is a video game, I will complete story objectives as I feel interested in doing so. However, I will also be much more interested running around Hyrule, trying to get a better horse, trying to find cool weapons, and overall just doing random side missions. If Breath of the Wild were a tabletop game, I'd still be willing to explore how I want. However, my wants would be different. I would want much more to defeat Ganon and would be much more focused on that than just running around trying to get a different type of horse. For a D&D example, you can look at the adventure Dragon of Icespire Peak. In that adventure, it starts off with the party being told that there's a dragon that's messing up the local area and putting people in danger, so they need to show up and try to help the people where possible and potentially defeat the dragon. From there, the party are totally free to explore those lands how they please. However, they are also restricted by the knowledge that they know that there's a white dragon here and they know that the people need help. In theory, since it's a sandbox game, they could just say, oh, we don't want to do this, we're going to head back to Neverwinter. However, no party's going to do that because they understand from their player character's perspective, it just wouldn't make sense for that to happen. Their character's goals of helping people and stopping the dragon keep them in place in the general area that you've prepared. So when it comes to actually preparing a sandbox game, there's multiple ways you can do this, and what works for you is mainly going to be determined on you. So these aren't going to be strict rules on how you must run a sandbox game, more of just ideas and advice that you should hopefully take inspiration from. Firstly, when it comes to locations in your game, there's sort of two mentalities that you can go about this. The first one is to have every possible location that exists in your setting written down. So if the party asks if there's a certain type of shop in the certain type of district that they're in, you know whether or not there is one or not, because if it's not written down, it's not there. This can often be very, very time consuming to build. And on top of that, there's a tendency in some DMs to get focused on minute details like the city's plumbing, and then because they're so focused on that, they forget to answer important questions like whether or not there are any blacksmiths in this city. So it's my recommendation that if you feel more comfortable preparing in this style, the best thing you can do is either use a pre-existing setting that's well documented online, or to use pre-existing locations as placeholders for your own locations in your own world. Your players are probably not going to notice if they show up to Neverwinter, but it has a different name and a new coat of paint over it, and it saves you a lot of time preparing things that you may not ever actually use. On top of that, if your players ever ask a question about your city that you don't know the answer to, and you aren't comfortable coming up with one on the spot, well, it's not unlikely that that answer is just a quick Google search away online. The second way to prepare a game is to prepare it with only the most basic information going in and building the location as your players explore it. You don't need to know if there's a blacksmith in the city until your players actually ask you if there is one, and at that point, you can decide whether or not there is one and where it would be. This sounds preferable because you don't have to do as much prep. However, this still requires a lot of work. The work you have to do is just different. You have to find random tables online. You have to be good at taking notes in the game of the things that you're deciding moment by moment. You also have to be good at making decisions that actually make sense for your setting. If you tell the party that they're in a very magical city, and then you forget that fact when they ask where a magic shop is, and you tell them that there's only one, well, now you're going to have to try to come up with an explanation as to why one magic shop is supplying the entirety of this very magical city. And now there could be some really interesting answers to that question. However, if you're not good at making it sound like it's a very interesting question with a very interesting answer, and it sounds more like a plot hole, well, that's going to make your players feel less connected to the game and what you're telling them. For me, I like to do a mix of both. If I know that there's places my party are very likely to go, I will put a lot of effort into those places. However, for everything else, I will generally have super vague notes that are just enough to help me BS something on the spot if the game happens to go off in that direction. But outside of preparing your world, your setting, how do you actually prepare a sandbox D&D game? For some DMs, what we just discussed will literally be all they need. Either just like a ton of information on the setting, or some vague things that they can pull inspiration from, and then they can just run a game like that and then have their party make an adventure from those ideas. I'll call this the Minecraft mentality. You're dropping your players off with no real reason to be in the game, and then as they play, they find their purpose. However, that's not the only way you can run a sandbox game, and more often than not, you'll find more DMs doing what I'll call the Red Dead 2 mentality, meaning that there's an open world for the party to explore, segmented by missions that the party can choose what order they want to do them and when they want to do them, which give purpose to the open world. Again, I'm going to reference Dragon of Icespire Peak as a good example of the Red Dead 2 mentality. The party are free to explore Phandalin, learn information, and then explore the world from those rumors that they heard. However, they are also given missions which directly reward them for going to new places, as well as let them know that these locations exist. Now, the intimidating thing about giving your party multiple missions to choose from is that you either need to have all of those missions well prepared, which is a lot of prep, or go into them very vaguely prepared and then try to work with them on the spot, which can also be very intense. Especially if you're doing something like running Dragon of Icespire Peak, having to read the adventure on the spot and try to run it while you're reading it could definitely be a major struggle. Some will be fine with this outcome, however, there is a more manageable way to prepare for these games. Either after you finish a session or in between sessions, show your party the information that they've gathered, the rumors that they've heard, the quest missions that they've been given, and ask them which one they'll want to do in the next game. Your party still have totally full control of their choices and what they want to do. However, that also means that it's going to be much easier for you as you only have to prepare the thing that you know they're going to go out and do. However, there are still some complications with this. The main one being a party one week may decide they want to go do one mission, however when the next week comes around, they're not really in the mood for that one anymore and want to do something else. Now your options are either to tell them, hey, this is what we agreed to do, we have to do this, or again, try to run an adventure on the spot, which is what we're trying to avoid. Especially if you're doing something like running Dragon of Icespire Peak, having to read the adventure on the spot and try to run it while you're reading it could definitely be a major struggle. Now that isn't perfect either. Just because they don't have the ability to change their choice, that doesn't mean they didn't want to change it. So instead, I might even recommend just waiting until a couple days before the game, whenever you're about to prepare, and ask your players what mission they'll want to do. Instead of it being a week since their last choice, it will have been a couple days, and hopefully more often than not, that choice is going to be the one that they're actually more committed to since they've had more time to think about it. Now you have some pretty solid footing on some of the best ways you can prepare for a sandbox game. However, how do you actually run a good one? Well, a lot of that is going to depend on the particulars of how you want to run a game. So again, I'm going to try my best to give you ideas that will help the most amount of people instead of me telling you what specific type of sandbox game you should be running. This is still going to be largely determined by what I find fun and what I want to bring into D&D. However, I'm going to try my best to make it apply to the most amount of DMs as possible. Firstly, it's really important to encourage your players to explore and create their own fun in the game. Whether it's through inspiration or a random common magic item, letting them know that you're seeing them and what they're trying to do and giving them a little reward for that goes a huge way in actually encouraging them to do it. Sandbox video games do this all the time. In Spider-Man, you get rewarded with new customization and new unlocks if you explore the game and try out the different side stuff instead of going from main story mission to main story mission. The same thing is true in Red Dead 2. Fallout 4 just straight up gives you XP every time you go to a location you've never been to before. Just a little something to let the players know that you don't think what they're doing is a waste of time. My next recommendation, and this is assuming that the game you're running has actual missions your party can choose from, is to make the order of those missions matter. have the consequences of one mission carry forward into another, and have the players potentially be punished if they hold off on a certain mission for too long. This allows the party to really get the feeling that they aren't just choosing which missions they'll experience in what order, but actually they're choosing in what ways they want to impact the world. What missions are most important to them? What do they feel is most dire? What do they feel like can wait? One of the missions could be to steal an important sword from one of the people in the town. If you wait too long to complete the mission, well, maybe a different party comes along and completes it for you, and now you have to go after them and try to steal the sword off of them. But if you do it too early and potentially get caught, well, now the party have to go into hiding from the guards because they are now wanted criminals. And finally, the most important thing you can do in a sandbox game is to actually get input from the players on where they want to go next and what they want to do. Players will often have a wish for the direction they want to see the game take, however, won't voice that because they see the direction the game is going and assume, based off of their usual being used to linearity, that this is the only path that they can go down. However, if you ask them directly what type of adventures they might be interested in, and then you give them those opportunities to explore and go on those adventures, well, you're really letting them know that the game is theirs to explore. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it and you want to see more like it, the best thing you can do is to subscribe to stay updated on future releases. Thank you again, and this is the end of the video.